Monolith Soft is now fully owned by Nintendo. While the Xenoblade Chronicles developers have been a subsidiary of Nintendo since 2007, the House of Mario has not had full control over all Monolith Soft shares until now. So what's going on? What's changed? Why is there a change now? And what might the consequences be? Like, subscribe, and let's investigate Monolith Soft's ownership situation. So, while the source of this information is Monolith Soft's own website, there was a little bit of sleuthing via gaming site Automaton West. And it seems that while Nintendo bought an 80% stake in Monolith Soft back in 2007 and increased that stake to 96% in 2011, Nintendo never had quite complete control. Now, out of a total of 2,400 shares, Nintendo owns the full 2,400 shares, whereas previously they owned a mere 2,320. Those remaining 80 shares were shared between Monolith Soft's most senior figures and founders. 30 were attributed to Hirohide Sugiura, the president of Monolith Soft. With 30 shares, Tetsuya Takahashi is the executive director and the person driving the story, concepts and lyrics of the Xenoblade Chronicles titles, plus even being the Japanese voice director on several games. Then 20 shares were accrued to Yasuyuki Hone, a game designer who helped pitch the original Xenoblade Chronicles and who is now reportedly working with the Kyoto branch of Monolith Soft, supporting on Nintendo titles, including, of course, Splatoon 2 and the recent 3D Zelda games. On his blog, he explains, "I'm doing a lot of things at a game company, but basically I'm going to maintain my stance as a painter. Mainly in my job, I am an art director and background art. I don't think I'll mention my main job because I have a confidentiality obligation. As a hobby, I also make playing cards, doll miniatures, and stringed instruments." Okay then, what is going on? Well look, these shares didn't get eaten by the shares fairy. The only plausible way for Nintendo to come into possession of these shares is for the three individuals concerned to sell. So the question becomes, why did they retain the shares to start with, and why sell now? For why they retain the shares to begin with, it's important to consider the origins of Monolith Soft's relationship with Nintendo. This was not some aggressive takeover from Bully Boy Nintendo, but came about as the Monolith Soft team felt limited in terms of their creative freedom at their former haunt of Bandai Namco. Satoru Iwata told investors that, in the case of Monolith Software, Mr. Sugiura, the president, and Nintendo have a long-term relationship. How Mr. Sugiura thinks is close to how Nintendo thinks. The software Mr. Sugiura would like to create is in line with what Nintendo would like to have for its platform, so we thought that Nintendo should support this idea, and we decided to take action. The initial purchase of 80% of shares kept Bandai with 16% of the shares, but what of the remaining 4%? Well, these were kept by the three creatives. Now, there were a few reasons why they might wish to buy a percentage stake. To start with, given that creative control was an issue for them, this stake granted them at least some small influence on what will be being made. Granted, a combined share of 4% is not a huge stake, but financially it will be difficult for individuals, even well-remunerated game developers with a good track record, to purchase a controlling stake in such a company. It seems that Bandai Namco were willing to allow the sale, and included in this was permitting these three most senior individuals to acquire shares. This links to the second reason, which is, of course, the reason that most people own shares. It would allow these creatives to profit from the continued growth of the company. Now, Nintendo could theoretically have tried to muscle these three out of their shares at any point, but doing so would be wholly counterproductive. They acquired Monolith Soft initially as a way to allow their creatives more freedom, and since then they have developed the company and built particularly their Kyoto offices as a support studio for Nintendo EPD. They also have put a lot of their weight behind pushing Xenoblade Chronicles into the spotlight, with 4 releases just on the Switch, 5 if you count the separate physical release of Torn of the Golden Country. But Nintendo are not majorly into mergers and acquisitions, and the reason for this is simple. If you buy the company, you don't automatically acquire the people, or at least not for a very long time. It's a Pyrrhic victory to buy a company, but fail to capture the excitement and commitment of the creative minds that built the organization in the first place. And then you just end up with some computers, a letterhead, and some very expensive paper clips. Therefore, Nintendo has tended to move at quite specific points to acquire other developers. With Next Level Games, some of these senior people were looking to sell their shares, and so the business relationship that Nintendo had built with the development team at Next Level Games, a relationship which had proved hugely profitable with the massively successful Luigi's Mansion 3, was at risk of interruption. Hence, the decision was taken to step in and purchase the studio. But with Monolith Soft, having the studio heads financially committed to the studio was obviously of huge benefit, as it essentially locked in their talents for at least the medium term. It's possible, in fact, that Nintendo may have wanted them to put their money where their mouth was and actually make such an investment as a way of showing their commitment and seriousness in the endeavour, while Nintendo was making a fairly major move for them, particularly at a time when they were not quite as financially secure as they now are. Presumably, the value of the shares of Monolith Soft have only increased over the years, so if one, or indeed all three of the company's founders have decided to move on, I expect they will be very well remunerated. And I'm sure they would have in Nintendo a very willing buyer. It doesn't necessarily mean that these people are bound for retirement either. After all, these are not just financial commitments, but creative endeavors. Tetsuya Takahashi has just turned 58, Yasuyuki Hone is 53, and while I can't find a birth date for Hirohito Sugiura, he is likely to be the most senior of the three. The Japanese minimum retirement age is 60, but many companies have a teinen, or mandatory retirement age, though this is not mandatory from government, but rather a choice decided by the company to enforce for its workers. Commonly, people retire at 60 and then return to work in a less demanding role until 65 or thereafter. This means that people are rehired under a new and different contract. We've seen this at Nintendo with former president Tatsumi Kimishima seeming to be sailing off into the sunset in 2018, with Shuntaro Furukawa taking over as president, but still turning up to surprise podcasters and ex-Nintendo of America employees Kit and Quista as still being very involved with his finger on the pulse a year later. It would not surprise me at all if Hirohito Sugiura was hitting the point of the mandatory retirement age decided either by Monolith Soft or possibly by Nintendo, an age set by the company, mind you, so it's not like he wouldn't have had a say in it. At this point, if he wanted to use this opportunity to be rehired into a new role, it would make sense as part of this transition to sell the shares, and my guess is that the trio decided in Musketeer fashion to sell together. And while it sounds like a happy ending for the three creatives, this isn't completely neutral for Nintendo after all. While having three creatives locked in was a great guarantee of quality for Nintendo, enough time has passed now and the company has exponentially grown to the point where it clearly has Nintendo's footprint. Moreover, ownership now allows them a lot more flexibility in how they monetize titles such as Xenoblade Chronicles, free of the kind of co-ownership, profit-sharing arrangements which have made them prioritize in their official releases relatively small franchises like Pikmin over a megaton franchise like Kirby. Kirby's profits are shared with HAL, and its extensive merchandising wing is managed by the co-owned subsidiary Warp Star, whereas for Pikmin, things are a lot cleaner for Nintendo as they own the property outright. If they want to, say, drop Pikmin cameos into the Super Mario Bros. Movie, the paperwork would be far less extensive than for Kirby. While I doubt this would necessarily affect ownership terms concerning prior games, such as the Xenoblade Chronicles series, put the case that the company was gearing up to launch a new IP for the new console, an IP significantly supported by Nintendo. In this case, there may be some soft pressure from the Big N to attain full ownership of the company before going forward with production and merchandising, so that their ongoing negotiations would be that much simpler. Again, it's not that Nintendo were chucking three of Monolith Soft's top brass out of the window, but rather that If Monolith Soft's leaders were planning to take the stairs at some point, then sooner would probably help Nintendo out. And of course, we know Sugiura-san had that long relationship with the top brass at Nintendo, which led to Nintendo's ownership in the first place. So there is an element of gratitude and mutual cooperation that has already been established between them. My expectation is that we won't see much on the surface has changed over the next year or so. I don't necessarily expect any of these three figures to leave the studio just yet, as many Japanese people stay working for a very long time, especially those with such creative roles. However, this will give Nintendo even greater incentives to continue to back Monolith Soft projects, including Xenoblade, which just became even more important to them. I've yet to do a full deep dive into Monolith Soft, as I've yet to fully catch up on the Xenoblade Chronicles series. I've really enjoyed what I've played so far, but they're not easy ones to squeeze into a schedule. Currently, I'm trying to find time for Torna, let alone 100 plus hours for Xenoblade Chronicles 3. At some point, I will try to do a much fuller investigation into the company, but it will still wait until I am more caught up with the games. However, I know there are many wise and well-informed Monolith Soft fans out there, so please do add comments or context below, and I'll use the pin comment feature if there's anything significant that needs to be added to this video for context or clarification. Thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Check out the videos on screen, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.